Tom Farrey is now going to come out here and talk. And one of the things that I want to tell you all is that Tom and I share this wonderful kindred spirit about this work. And I'm going to give you that first. And then, yeah, that's the magic clicker. You all should know. Yeah, you can. But I don't know if Kate will allow you to do that. And I just want to thank you again, right, for everything, honestly.
Oh, thank you.
All right?
Thank you.
Be well.
Kevin was a huge inspiration of mine. If you haven't read his book, The Rules of the Red Rubber Ball, you should. Ours were two of the first books published by ESPN Books. His was inspirational. Mine was like wonkish and serious, so his is a lot easier to get through than mine, but he's a bit of a hero of mine and certainly an inspiration for Project Play. All right, so to get a little bit serious here, I'd like to bring out Dionne Koller, and we're going to talk about the role of stewardship in the Olympic and Paralympic movement. Dionne is a professor of law at the University of Baltimore. She's the director of the Sports Law Center. I've known Dionne for a number of years. You helped us draft the Children's Bill of Rights in Sports a few years ago, and she is now the co-chair of the Commission on the State of the U.S. Olympics and Paralympics. So, Dionne, what is this commission, and what are you trying to do?
Well, first of all, we're not trying to do anything. We have a very specific charge. So the commission is an independent commission that was formed by Congress as part of the 2020 Empowering Olympic, Paralympic, and Amateur Athletes Act. That was the second of two statutes Congress passed in the wake of the investigations, hearings, findings into the crimes and abuse perpetrated by Larry Nassar. And one of the things Congress wanted to do was set up an independent commission to look into 10 areas of study, so very comprehensive. We're a 16-member commission. We were appointed in a bipartisan way by the House and Senate, Republicans and Democrats, although our work really isn't political. It's sport literally transcends politics in this situation. And so we're independent. We're not a USOPC commission. We're not affiliated with an NGB. This is something that Congress has asked us to look into.
Mm-hmm. What is the timeline for your work in the process?
So Congress set a deadline of September 30th for our operations. We're funded by the government, and so our operations have to stop at that point. So all of our intake, all of the work we're doing will end at that point. There is, getting a commission stood up and getting it sort of unwound takes a lot of time, and so there will be a few months as we sort of unwind the operations, get the report written, printed, just those logistical things. So September 30th is the cutoff date for our work, and we will have a report issued to the public by early spring of 24.
So you have these 10 areas of study. What are you asking of the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee, and what are you asking of the NGBs?
So we have asked the USOPC, NGBs, and really all stakeholders in the Olympic movement to provide us with information relevant to the 10 areas of study. We have said, give us documents, give us information, inform our work in these 10 areas. And so we have done that. We're going to be working on everything from the general public. Our work is transparent, we're open, and we're saying, give us information about this so that we can do the best study that we can possibly do.
And these 10 areas of study and your work in general flows from the Amateur Sports Act of 1978, which has been amended a couple of times. You've written a number of papers on it. I've written a whole chapter in my book about the Amateur Sports Act and its implications on the grassroots in our country. And I don't know, John, if we're able to show this quote or not. We got it. Thank you, John. You're awesome. Ted Stevens is the person who said this quote here. He is the author, the champion of the Amateur Sports Act of 1978. And when he was on the floor, he described it. This is not a bill merely to assist Olympic and elite athletes. Far from it. I am hopeful that with the new goals and directives for both the Olympic Committee and the national governing bodies, it will be easier for all Americans to find programs and facilities through which they can further their athletic interests. And so what does that mean? As I wrote in my book, the senator's intentions were reflected in the original draft of the bill. Above all, the goal of the law was to encourage participation in amateur athletic activities by citizens of the U.S., Talked about setting national goals for amateur athletic activities, protecting the opportunity of any athlete who wanted access to competition, expand access to sports by women, racial minorities, to promote physical fitness, to assist organizations and persons concerned with sports and the development of just amateur sports in general. And how would they achieve this vision? They talk about reaching across the whole system rather than remaining confined to a few niches of influence. Talked about new research in sports science and medicine. Talked about the creation of high, clear standards for certification of coaches, for the building of facilities in the most needy amateur sports. And the commission estimated, which was 50 years ago, this was their version of the commission. They estimated that all this would cost the public a relatively modest sum of $83 million a year, which is about $385 million in today's dollars. That money was stripped out. It's one of the big problems with the Amateur Sports Act. It's an unfunded mandate. So I want to give a little bit of context there. But so as you go about your work, Dionne, how much does that framing, I mean, do you plan to look at the function of the MGBs from that lens?
Well, we were asked to, one of our 10 areas of study is to look at functions of NGBs. But I think all 10 areas of study, Tom, have to be informed by the Amateur Sports Act. That was the blueprint. What you just read, I mean, my God, we poured every hope and dream and aspiration that we had for the U.S. Sports system and Olympic movement into this statute. And I think what's really important about what you're emphasizing is that's a 1970s statute. And everything you said is important. It's worthwhile. It's goals we're still talking about today. But there's no way for us to do a study and evaluation and assessment, which is what we're being asked to do. The second thing we're being asked to do is provide policy recommendations where appropriate. There's no way to do that without looking at the original act and accounting for the fact that this is not the 1970s anymore. The original act came out of the Ford Commission, the President's Commission. And so I think it's really important to have an understanding of the history, where we've been, what was important at the time, but where are we today in sports?
Mm-hmm. Why should the NGBs, why should the USOPC, why should the broader Project Play network lean into this? Why should they care?
Well, I think they should care for a few reasons. First of all, we're independent. We've been asked to engage in a study, and what we want to do is provide really the most fair, credible, and comprehensive process that's really ever been done in terms of sport policy in this country. And so they should lean in because it's important to be a part of that work. These opportunities don't happen. 50 years ago almost is the last time we did a government commission on this. And so lean in because we want to hear from you. We want to understand what the issues are. We want to understand what your policy recommendations might be. And lean in because this is an opportunity, Tom, to not make sport policy out of moments of crisis and reactivity. I think that's important, and we've gotten a lot of important policy out of that. But lean into the work because this is an opportunity for all of us to come together and think about how we can build the best system that we can.
Mm-hmm. And we'd love to have some questions from you in the audience, so please go into the app. You know the instructions. And then our team will pull up hopefully a question or two here. So let me ask you, what about safe sport? Is that part of your purview?
Well, it's part of our purview in the sense that one of our areas is to look at most recent reforms to the movement, and of course, safe sport is one of the reforms that is most recent. We're not investigating safe sport. We weren't asked to separately audit safe sport, but safe sport is certainly part of the work in the sense that it is a reform. It's part of the movement, and so yes, in that sense.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Will there be a public hearing? I mean, this is the first listening session, and thank you for making this your first listening session. But will there be a public hearing around this?
Yes, we are required by statute to hold a public hearing. We want to hold a public hearing. Transparency is important and communicating with the public. The public hearing will be September 6th in Washington, D.C., and we're still putting all that together. But there will be one public hearing.
Gotcha. What about just governance of abuse issues in general? Is that part of, your purview?
So again, we're not sort of investigating any particular specific, abuse case or abuse issue, but all of that, the safe sports system and NGBs and responsiveness to athletes, our charge is very broad that Congress gave us. It's everything from governance, finances, athlete participation levels, bringing the Olympics and Paralympics to the United States. So we have a big range of questions that Congress wants us to study. And these are questions that are not, and you like to talk about this, siloed, right? They're inextricably intertwined with the bigger sport ecosystem. And so in order to provide a study and an assessment of the things Congress has asked about, safe sport is going to be a part of that. All these different areas, they all connect. And so we'll have something to say about all of those things, because you can't give a coherent response without talking about it as a whole.
Right. Could you go back to the last question from Julie McClary, which I think was good? I think it's, are you going to look only at federal things from a federal perspective, or will you look at the state area? Will the role of state and local policy and the interaction with federal policy be addressed, or will the recommendations only be at the federal level?
So I think we're a federal commission. The Stevens Act is federal law, and so recommendations, and I can't speak to what our recommendations will be at this point, but in terms of sport policy, state and federal government has to work together. And so to the extent that after our intake process, we feel that there should be some recommendations addressed to the states because it's more appropriately handled by states. I think we would make a recommendation and tailor it that way. We're certainly not limited to only recommendations about the Stevens Act or only recommendations that can be achieved on the federal level.
Gotcha. Another question was, who's on this commission, these 16 members?
Well, I'm not going to recite them all off the top of my head. What I would say is please go to our website, csusop.org. You can see the bios of all the commissioners. We have an extraordinary level of sport expertise on this commission. Several commissioners are here. You just heard from Edwin Moses, Melissa Stockwell, Benita Fitzgerald-Mosley, Nancy Hogshead-Makar. I co-chair it with Han Zhao. He is very known in the athlete community, and so we have a lot of folks with a lot of different levels of sport expertise, and so look us up on our website, and you can engage with us. You can submit your comments through there. It's 16 of us, and we're doing our best, but we want to hear from you.
Yeah. One of the panelists we'll have later today is Rocky Harris, the new chief of sport for the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee. And when I spoke to him a couple months ago, I was really impressed. He talked about we need a rethink, was his word, a rethink of our entire sports system and just how the USOPC and the NGBs fit into this, where do the colleges and the high schools and, at the entry level, really. So is that aligned with how you're kind of approaching your work within your scope?
So it aligns in the sense that, again, we have a very specific deliverable to Congress. It's the 10 areas of study. But as I just said, you can't think about these areas without thinking about the entire movement and sport ecosystem. And I think, so to the extent all these different areas can come together and inform our work, and to the extent that the public tells us and the movement and stakeholders tell us, hey, in this 10 areas or one of these areas of study, you should actually be looking at how high schools feed into this. You can't separate it out. But what I think is a great opportunity, and what I think we're really united in terms of the commission, is hearing from everybody and hearing from the community. This is not a top-down. 16 of us could get in a room. We've got the expertise. It truly is extraordinary. And sort of writing a report, just talking to ourselves. We have already taken in tens of thousands of pages of documents, done hundreds of interviews, focus groups. We have over 2,000 responses to a survey that we sent out, and that number is growing by the day. So as people tell us what we should be looking at, that informs the work. And so I think what's great about our commission is we're united in let's make a positive contribution. Let's think about this stuff in the right way. And so what Rocky's saying, what other people are saying, and saying, hey, look at this as you study that area, we're taking that very seriously.
So we at Aspen, we try to be a facilitator and just an enabler of the most important conversations out there. And today's agenda is set up that way. It's a conversation between you and I. Then we will go into these lunchtime conversations for national sport organizations, community recreation groups, and the school sports sector. 3 key entities where they will aggregate thought around how they see themselves within the Olympic and Paralympic movement and what do they need to be more, how to create better connections in the service of building healthy children and communities through sports. And then they'll come back here for a listening session, which will be live streamed. It'll be our lone live stream session. You will moderate and you will listen to hear what the 3 representatives of those sectors hear from. But as they go into these sessions, let's just kind of walk through them methodically real quickly. What do you want to hear from community recreation groups? What do you want to hear from school sports folks? And what do you want to hear from the national sport organizations?
Well, what I think is important is, and I don't want to prejudge, I think our 10 areas of study in terms of our NGBs responsive to athletes, athlete participation levels in general. You know, you can look at our 10 areas of study. I don't want to prejudge and say, tell us this, tell us that. What I want to do is really throw it open, Tom, so that we preserve this process as open and not prejudging anything. What we want to hear is, what do you need us to know? What is critical for us to know in this work? What do you need to do your work well? What would, from your perspective and where you sit in sports, what would make a difference? So that in 50 years, if there's another commission appointed to study all of this thing, we've actually really done something. And so I don't want to prejudge in the sense, but I do think that we have a uniquely American system of sport in so many ways, embedding sport in schools, a lot of privatized youth sport. We don't have a sport ministry. We don't have a lot of public funding. So there's a lot of ways that we're uniquely American about sport, and so all these different groups feed into that uniquely American vision. And so tell us how to turn that into a 21st century really working sport policy.
Yep, got it. In 20 seconds left before we wrap up here, the NCAA, we had an audience question about how does the NCAA, if at all, tie into this work?
Well, I think the NCAA ties in a couple ways. One of our items of study, you know, we have not been asked to look at NCAA sports. One of our commissioners is Rob Mullins. He's the athletic director at the University of Oregon. He's very informative on these issues. We've talked to a lot of people in NCAA sports about things we need to know because, of course, 75–80% of our Olympic athletes, for instance, come out of our intercollegiate sports program. So again, you can't separate out pieces and sort of talk about the areas of study coherently. So, but the NCAA, we're not sort of investigating the NCAA. They have their own issues, but we are certainly informed, and we we could have a whole session on that. But we're certainly informed by the things that are happening there. So to the extent that an athlete is a college athlete and transitions into Olympic movement sports, that has to inform our thinking.
That's awesome. Well, thank you, Dionne. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll, so definitely enjoy those lunchtime conversations. Please come back, be part of the live stream session. And now I would like to bring in Julie again, who will lead another discussion that builds on our work on the Children's Bill of Rights in Sports, which, by the way, Julie was the first athlete to endorse. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you, as always. Julie's always on the front end of things.
Thank you, Tom. That was great.